All right. The final is not going to have a huge number of questions on it. They're all short answer, maybe with a few lines, a small amount of code. You are certainly welcome to, go and test the code in your PSQL in Postgres before you turn it in. But you are not welcome to, you should do the work yourself. Do not get help from other people. Certainly, this is an open book, open notes. You're welcome to go back to the interactive homeworks. Those are still up and available, and go back through those if that helps you. And some of the stuff does come from that. But the question is kind of which things am I actually going to test on? There is stuff from this last lecture, the previous piece of this lecture. Like, why is a full table scan sometimes a better solution and under what circumstance? Or why does an index make searching faster? I think, it would be useful for you to put in a query, select star from some table, name list, and do an explain plan. So, just explain that select statement and be able to, say this is what it's doing in that select statement. The final is basically going to touch on some of the basics in the class. Like, can you create a table? Can you create a primary key on that table? Can you create an index? Can you create a unique index? And what's the difference between, primary keys, unique indexes, and what is a check constraint? We did at least a couple of those in this class. What is a foreign key constraint? Can you take a simple ERD with a table and convert that into the SQL to create the table? And then we also touched some on things like history. Okay. And I would say the history that would be relevant is, really the question of what do NASA, IBM, Caterpillar, and Rockwell have to do with the information control system that they developed. What does that have to do with modern day databases? I mean, that's something that happened in the 60s as a part of the space program to go to the moon. And it's still having influence today. So I would say that's kind of the summary of what's going to be on the final. I have basically looked at my written copy of the final and summarized the questions that are there. My plan is to have 9 questions. You are expected to answer 8 of them, not 9 of them. The final is worth 200 points, so you can figure out that they're going to be about equal numbers of points. Make the answers as short as reasonable, This is not write 3 pages. This is, if I ask for an explanation, give me a paragraph or maybe 2. Maybe include an example. Okay, if it says, can you give me an example of creating a table with a primary key? Then give me a create table statement with a primary key and say, this is what makes the primary key. So if I go into PSQL here, actually, let's edit a file. Final q1.sql. And I've got a create table here. It'll drop it if it exists. And what's the difference between this create table and one that is like this? We'll create a slightly different table that just says serial without the primary key. Let's actually go run those. And I get a warning that Q1A did not exist. But if I describe final Q1 in PSQL, you'll notice that this one has a primary key. What is the purpose of that primary key? It actually gives you the name of the primary key as well. What did it call the primary key when it created it? And if I do the other table, you notice that there's a table. It still creates this ID as an integer and gives it a value, but it's not a primary key. So what's the use of having a primary key? If I go in and take a look at a little bit more complex table, here's a table that has a username. And down here we have a unique index. Let's create a non-unique index. create on some data. And let's run that. Oops. If I type my password right. Okay, so this has a unique index, a non-unique index, and a primary key. So what's the difference between a unique index and a non-unique index? And can I have a constraints on this table? If I build two tables, can I have foreign key constraints within them? What is a foreign key constraint? And what does it do for you? How does it protect your data and make certain you validate your data? Another question you should ask is, what's a check constraint and how does it validate your data? So between those things, between being able to write some simple queries, maybe make a join between two tables, and explain what the join is, explain how the database is able to take a join and convert that into writing a program to get you back the data. That would be the stuff on the final. So, it's not, it shouldn't be any surprises to anyone. And I think, that's what we're going to cover on the final.